Welcome back to the Createch stage, where creativity meets technology at the CogX Virtual Festival for AI and Breakthrough Technologies. It's so exciting to be part of this biggest, most inclusive and forward-thinking gathering of leaders. I'm Janet Hull, and I represent the UK Creative Industries Council, a community of leaders who together seek to safeguard, support, promote and grow the UK creative industries, both around the UK and on the global stage. I'm your MC for the day. This is our first year at CogX, our fourth year of running Createch. And we're delighted that although we're the newbies, we're already the second most popular stage with over 1,800 registered to participate, 30% of them from outside of the UK. The Createch stage is hosted by the Creative Industries Council and supported by Facebook, UK, RI, Moore Kingston Smith and Digital Catapult. CogX is all about community. And if the creative industries is a community you want to belong to, just email us at createch@thecreativeindustries.co.uk and we'll make sure to keep you involved. The overall theme of CogX this year is, how do we get the next 10 years right? And for us in the UK creative industries for this next session, this means, how do we stay ahead of the curve in understanding where new technologies are going to take us? And what does it mean for the way we create, consume, and connect? In this session, we're building the future, answering questions such as, what is the metaverse and how far away from it are we? Why does spatial computing matter? What will 5G enable? Curated by the Chair of Immerse UK and CEO Rewind, please welcome to the stage Createch Wants to Watch, Sol Rogers. Sol is passionate about spatial computing and progressing toward the metaverse. Over to you, Sol.
Oh, thank you for the very kind introduction, Janet, and an absolute pleasure to be here. In such a strange time. It was lovely to be at Createch last year, and I think what you've managed to pull together this year is actually allowed us to get to a broader audience and almost surpass what we could have done physically. So I think it's a real forcing function of how everyone is pulling together to do great work. An absolute pleasure to talk to you guys today about some areas I'm incredibly passionate about. I've been passionate about where we are going with spatial computing and the direction to the metaverse, and how the impact of 5G technology is really enabling that. And I was asked to bring together a small panel to discuss just that. And I hope that we'll have a lively discussion for the next 45 minutes. So joining me on the panel is Oliver Kibblewhite, who has a background in immersive technology and has just founded an agency specifically focused on the application and utilization of 5G technology. Hey, Oliver.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No worries at all. I'm also going to be joined by Brandy Moore. Brandy is the sales director for mixed reality at Microsoft. She's a 15-year veteran of Microsoft. I think she's almost bleeding Microsoft. She's been there so long, but has had her finger on the pulse from everything from Azure to security and beyond. And I really appreciate her joining us today. Hey, Brandy.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And finally, a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Kember, who has got up the earliest because he's on the west coast of America, who's director of developer relations at Nvidia, previously office of the CTO at Google, and a veteran of the visual effects industry. Hey, Jeff, morning.
Hey, good morning, Sol. Happy to be here.
Do you have a good cup of tea?
I do. I have a proper cup of tea right here, ready to go.
That's the important thing, so we'll be able to get through this. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the metaverse, spatial computing, 5G technologies, some of the influences for us professionally, and some of our future visions of kind of personally where we think this is all going. But before we get going, it would be wrong of me not to mention kind of how our world is being forced, has a forcing function of a pandemic on us, and where COVID is affecting us all in our daily lives, let alone this conference itself. But one of the things about COVID and how we are all reacting to it is it's kind of shifting our worldview, I think, a little bit for the better. For far too long, we've been defining ourselves by our borders, drawn on the planet's surface by others, politicians or kings or queens or whoever. But this pandemic is really making us understand that we are one human species interconnected with each other's, but also really interconnected with our fragile planet and its ecosystem. And I think all of us are taking a breath to kind of look at what's important to us and what we can do to kind of connect ourselves with each other better and what we can do for the planet better. And I hope on the way out of this pandemic, some of the technologies we will come to bear will hopefully make the world a little bit of a better place. With my Immerse UK hat on, Immerse is a government-funded body via KTN to support the use of immersive technology in the UK and globally. And we're seeing some amazing work being done there. Anything from using immersive technology to train frontline workers and key workers in a hands-free environment for dangerous locations, to what the great teams at Microsoft have been doing about bringing back HoloLens devices and then redeploying them to frontline workers to be able to be trained by a remote assistant. And I'm sure Brandy will talk about that in a moment. To all these digital conferences, everywhere from video conferences run like this to completely virtual ones, such as HTC ran a 2,000 person conference recently, all in virtual reality, which let them do some pretty amazing things. And the big impact of that, let alone getting us more time, saving us jet lag, is a far smaller carbon footprint, which I think is quite exciting. So the metaverse is a very difficult subject to define, or a difficult thing to define. That's because it hasn't been defined yet. Matt Ball talks about the subject regularly, and I really like his angle. So widely, the metaverse is not really known yet. It's a direction of travel more than anything else. Just as we take in what we understand about the human body, and when we first started to understand, we tried to work out what's in the human body physically. And once we understood that, we could understand how it's all interconnected. And we've been trying ever since to try and work out all of the forms and functions that bring this thing together. But we really don't understand truly what consciousness is, or what the idea of a soul is. Similarly, if you think about the internet from the 1950s to the 1990s, we knew what file transfer systems were, we knew what real-time connectivity were, and the core dynamics to bring everything together. But it's only now that we're really defining what the social web is, or what misinformation is, or what types of content we want to produce. And all that is being defined right now, even like minute by minute. You know, think as what happened in the last few months with the rise of TikTok as a new platform for everyone to communicate, or virtual experiences, or virtual conferences. So the metaverse is the same thing, really. It has that sort of direction of travel where we know roughly where we're going, but we don't know what it will be. It is defined, and the definition of it is always evolving, but at the moment, a lot of people really consider the metaverse to be a persistent, synchronized, living universe where each of us can participate and be present in a space, have a sense of agency, and engage with an extensive economy that transcends all of our individual experiences, and perhaps even crosses the divide between a completely digital world and a physical world. But as all those terms are very loose, that's because we don't really know what that's going to look like. Just the same as in the 1950s, you couldn't tell you what TikTok would be and why it's been so impactful to almost 1 billion people on the planet. But science fiction has been thinking about what the metaverse is for a long time. And often we're bringing kind of into popular culture those ideas. If you think about what Ready Player One did with defining what the Oasis was, it's a digital construct for us to live our lives within, and we live it as richly as we do in the physical world. And I believe that we're getting closer to that. And some of the glimpses are in the gaming universe, or the digital world. Second Life, Minecraft, massive multiplayer online games, and Fortnite most recently. All of those places, those constructs, allow us to kind of live within another world, but they are just glimpses of where I think we're going to end up. So I guess the first kind of discussion point really is, why does the metaverse really matter? And especially I think in this time of our current reality is slightly shifted, but why is everyone so excited? Why is the metaverse important? Would anyone like to jump in?
So I can jump in. I think, from our perspective, Saul, it's important because of what you said. It really does help us to, bring together the virtual reality, with the physical world, and it allows us to see and do things differently than we can in just our physical world. And it gives us some different possibilities to explore and to innovate and to really just kind of see beyond just what's sitting in front of us. And that can really help us, I think to innovate more, but also just to see, how we can help people just today by being able to connect, the physical and that virtual. We can really, I think, connect today with, what's happening and also what's, like I said, what's possible, and bring those two things together. So, I mean, for me, the metaverse is something that's already there. Is it complete? No. Will it ever be complete? I don't really know if it will. I think it's something that's going to be ever evolving. But I think it's something that we're seeing today, that we're able to use in whether it's in gaming and, in virtual reality games, or in, what we're doing with mixed reality and augmented reality.
Absolutely. Oliver, why do you think it matters?
Big question. You start at the top, really, and that's that reality right now isn't very good fun. So anything that enables us to get out of the environments that we are stuck in at the moment, and enables us to broaden our experience, as well as bringing together people who are separated by distance. I think that that's one of the big potentials for, let's call it the metaverse, right now. Obviously, the forms of the metaverse that we have at the moment are prototypes. They're thought processes and experiments around what could be possible. The Ready Player One is, I think, quite a long way in the future, but we're not that far away from having a pair of glasses that might be able to bring someone into our space. The things the fruit company are doing in this arena, I think, are going to be transformative in the next couple of years. At the 5Gs, obviously, we're a 5G marketing agency first and foremost. We see the benefit and the potential of the technology to change how we as human beings interact with each other in a real-time sense. The fantastic other members of the panel are the people creating the hardware and the software and the content to enable these experiences. But the thing that's really going to change things is getting the connectivity and the devices into the hands of consumers and the people who will contribute to this universe and this world.
Absolutely. Jeff.
Excellent, thanks. So we feel it matters in the context that it's really a natural evolution of where we've gone from information sharing on the internet, and the importance of open standards to be able to build the metaverse on all of the various technologies that exist today, and then everything that is being created moving forward. We feel it's larger than one company, and it won't be just a single entity that brings us forward. Instead, it will be a conglomerate, really just a sharing of the various worlds that are, again, this is starting to blossom. I think from an IP standpoint, there's significant challenges in terms of, you gave the Ready Player One example. So if you go back and you read the book, it's an incredibly diverse world. And then if you go back and see the film, you're like, oh, okay, well, Spielberg did a great job. It's quite a narrow focus. When you're reading the book, you're like, how are they going to mash up, Star Wars and Star Trek and, World of Warcraft, and how is that all going to come together? And it didn't and can't, just from it could, but from a lawyer standpoint, it didn't happen. One has to have some scale reduction, but I think the really important thing for us, though, is the idea that it's an important next step in human interaction in terms of education, economic, entertainment. The idea of being able to democratize, really just, you talk about the next billion users, you talk about the next few billion users, and being able to say, how do we level the playing field with Africa and Asia and North America and South America and Europe, and just put it all together? How do you make it so that individuals who are perhaps in a disadvantaged part of the world are able to have access to education and recreation and adventure that they may not normally be able to today?
Yeah, I mean, just to slightly go left, I think there's a really interesting discussion topic there in itself, talking about the have and the have-nots, so with the access of to technology specifically. What work is being done around in that space? Brandy, I know that at Microsoft, you've got quite a broad vision to be able to kind of democratize access to most of the technologies and software platforms you have. Is there anything specifically about how you're looking at that space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, we have HoloLens 2 is kind of our, key device, especially for the enterprise, where we focus a lot of time. But I think when you look at our Azure mixed reality services, those are what we're really making cross-platform. And especially if you look at like Azure Spatial Anchors. I mean, today, developers and consumers can work on that today for the HoloLens, but also for mobile devices, for iOS and Android. And I think, I agree also with what Jeff said, is that, we also really need to kind of look at this as a community and how we come together. And I think that's also how Alex Kipman, really looks at it. He doesn't look at all of the other devices out there as a competitive device, because there just aren't that many devices out there, in the universe today. So it's really, how can we come together and support each other? How can we create those open platforms? And that's something that Microsoft is trying to do, across our solution stacks, but especially within the Azure mixed reality services. We are really making that an open platform, and encouraging developers to come out and see, what they can do. Today it's only a few devices. It's HoloLens and it's mobile, but we'll continue to investigate how we can make that available to more and more devices as we move forward. And I think that's really, the idea is, how do we come together, enable each other, support each other to accelerate the ecosystem and really enable that innovation?
Yeah, I think there's something special there about, if we look at the forcing function of the speed of technology and how the access is. A friend of mine, we were talking about some of the developing nations in Africa that have jumped from no internet connectivity to 4G and everybody having a smartphone. They skipped through past personal computing. They went straight to the what's now. And I think there's some really interesting stuff about how do we give access to technology at a cost and a price point, which means it can have a real impact. One of the things that the metaverse is obviously going to be is, one of the enabling technologies is obviously the 5G technology, which seems to be doing a plethora of things to every industry. But for me, I'm really interested in how it takes the expensive silicon that we carry around in our pocket, so the CPU, the GPU, the phone, and puts most of that compute in the edge compute or the cloud compute, which means the device only has to be $50 worth of hardware instead of $1,000 worth of hardware. And I think that's a real enabler. I know that the Azure services have some of that. Is there anything you can talk about there? What's going on with Nvidia?
Absolutely, happy to do so. So from an edge compute standpoint, Nvidia has the EGX stack, and that's effectively taking the 5G stack, vRAN and such, and being able to run it virtualized. So you can have a 5G tower. I can be line of sight with my device to said tower, and the compute stack can be running in the tower on GPUs. And the exciting part about that is it's incredibly flexible. So it's a similar stack to what you can run on-prem or what you can run on the cloud. So in that case, you can have, again, custom applications. If you want to have 3D rendering, physics for world scale physics calculations for the environment that you're in, all of that can be running again, with the latency of line of sight and then directly in that tower, rather than having to go terrestrial links and then into a remote colo compute or cloud compute scenario. That's available too if you need that scale. But if you need the low, ultra low latency, that edge compute is available. That's one of the bits I'm excited about for 5G as well, as the additional frequency spectrum that exists. And so it's more than just faster. It's faster across greater airways. And Ollie, of course, will talk a little more to that. But I guess from a compute infrastructure standpoint, I'm most excited about some of the applications we're seeing on the GPU side, specifically on the Omniverse platform that I'm working on. The idea of being able to render across a whole bunch of GPUs effectively is taking what would be on a handset 10 years from now and bringing it back. So you're taking a GPU from a mobile like that you'd have in a decade, and you bring it back in time because you're using full-size GPUs and using multiples of them, and you're streaming those pixels back to the device, but you're still getting the interactivity of the device as though it were local. I think that's the interesting juxtaposition from a compute infrastructure standpoint.
That's really cool. I mean, and I've seen one of the HoloLens 2 demos where all of the compute is done in a machine nearby, but the device gets to see this amazing visuals of the Apollo 13 or was it Apollo 11 missions. Oliver, what does it really mean to consumers? I mean, this is all big tech and it gets all of us really excited, but what's it actually going to do for the man on the street or the person in the office?
That's a hard question to answer. I think the biggest change it's going to make to most people's lives is going to be about reliable connectivity as opposed to necessarily faster. The ability to connect reliably at a football game or at a concert, or more relevantly perhaps at a protest, because 5G assigns a rotating scheduling algorithm to all the devices that are connected to the tower. It means that your phone knows exactly when its next opportunity to transmit is. Whereas current technologies are kind of a bit of a bun fight. Everyone's just competing for the same airspace. But when you have an organized and scheduled broadcast system, it means that when you click that link on your phone, it can make the request within milliseconds, rather than waiting sometimes 10, 15 seconds to be able to transmit the request. And that's going to make a massive difference to people's lives. At the moment, obviously, the ability for a dense crowd of people to have reliable connectivity is incredibly important for accountability. But in the future, it means that you will be able to share moments and also get access to the services and the connectivity that you want in a reliable fashion. It also applies to things like traveling on trains, mass transit, the ability for reliable, high-speed, low-latency bandwidth for large quantities of devices is going to be completely game-changing. You know, I've got the thick end of £2,000 worth of phone here, but all it really needs, as Sol says, is to be $50 worth of screen and a modem. And that also has great implications for your battery life.
It's true. Jeff, you were talking a minute ago about open standard. I think Brandy did as well. I think it's a really important topic because there are a few people that think that just the same as that I have a digital store on my, an Apple store or an Android store or a Steam store or anywhere else where it's almost like I have to distribute onto that platform to get the commercials right. I don't believe that the metaverse is going to be built by one tech company. I don't believe that one of the companies out there, which is of a global nature, can create it. I think just the same as you can't say that one company owns the internet, the metaverse is going to require all of us kind of working together. I know that's a really passionate point of yours about the idea of being able to have open standards, but do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. No, super excited about that because I agree. I mean, if it were one company, we would all still be in the AOL disk land, and we're
hey, some people
not.
Still have those email addresses.
They do, and I like to hear their stories. I always ask them, so tell me more. How did you, was it a newspaper mail out? So from an open standard standpoint, we're really super passionate about universal scene description, because the idea of being able to say, I want data to be accessible from one place and move it to another. I mean, just from a content sharing standpoint, if you actually just want to think about the nuts and bolts and how you're actually going to build this thing, it has to be built on open standards. And in that context,
just define yes, what USD is, because there's a whole bunch of people that went, what do you mean?
Bam, it was a TLA, a 3-letter acronym. Who knew what that was? So universal scene description. So those of us who've toiled in obscurity and dark places, creating content for a long time, we've had to use varying technologies. You export something with FBX or use Alembic, or there's a variety of export mechanisms you use to get your product from 3 Studio Max or Modo or Maya or whatever you're using into the Foundry's products and so on. There's this interoperability issue, and a number of people have taken a stab at it in terms of how to do this. And there are a number of open source standards that exist in the world. Now, one of them is OpenEXR that Industrialet and Magic made. And that was, I worked at ILM for years, and there was just a desire internally to say, let's define an image format that works at 16-bit and 32-bit and is interoperable and make it open source. And the same thing happened for USD, and that's Pixar has created what is called the Universal Scene Description. And USD is a framework, a mechanism for being able to, a format effectively, to be able to export geometry and animation, and effectively to be able to say, this is what defines a scene, a stage, and make that accessible across multiple applications. If you look at Epic's Unreal Engine in version 4.25, they have significantly expanded support for USD. We're seeing a fair amount of adoption. So the Omniverse platform, which is what I work on at Nvidia, is based on USD, and it's a framework of various plugins and such that allow all of the various packages that one would use in a normal workflow for everything from architecture, engineering, construction to aerospace, right on through to manufacturing and M&E, virtual production, all of those different use cases, the various applications you're using all are able to utilize this open source standard. And it's the same example can be used for PhysX, which is in this case, a GPU accelerated physics engine. and also the idea of MDL for materials, material description language. So those are just a whole bunch of acronyms. I apologize for that, but they're open source standards that people are building on, and we're excited to see parallel adoption in other industries. I'll meet people who are in a car manufacturing environment, or someone who is producing something that is in like the $12 trillion AEC industry, and they've also adopted USD, and you think, okay, great, now tell me why, because and they have the same reasons that you came to, but for completely different industries where there'd normally be no Venn diagram overlap.
Well, the amazing thing about it's a USD being this 3D file format is that pretty much everything that humans now design is designed in 3D on a computer at some point, from architecture to medical devices to clothing. I saw Tommy Hilfiger saying that they're dropping any physical design come 2021. It's all going to be digital through a simulation clothing package. So we need this way of moving formats around, because that allows creativity to flourish, because people can use whatever the right tool is for them. It's their paintbrush, it's their palette to describe in, but it also allows us to take that 3D asset, that design, that world, that car, whatever, and move it into someone else's mode of operation. Maybe it's delivered to be a skin for my Fortnite character. Maybe it's 3D printed for a piece of jewelry. So I think there's something really important there.
And so, if I may add to your statement, the idea of saying, like, to look at one company with a proprietary portfolio of software, it's very difficult from a shareholder standpoint for that company to produce an interoperable format, not only within their own applications, but within all of this suite of applications. As essentially enabling competitive packages isn't really in their wheelhouse. So that's why we're excited about open source standards, in terms of, Pixar defined this and continues to develop it as their standard, and it's being adopted by this industry and many others. But the idea is that this is the same as the metaverse, but on a smaller scale. Yeah. Multiple companies have to contribute together to be able to make this thing work, and it has to be built on open standards.
Absolutely. I mean, and the core is, and was, and hopefully is built on the idea of an open standard that everyone can kind of engage with in any way, and it's not a walled garden hidden away. One of the things about the metaverse is, obviously, people often think about it digitally. So it's a place that I go to with a VR headset and I'm transported. But I'm really interested in the blend between the physical and the digital, where augmented reality or mixed reality begins to play, where we're bringing that digital world into our physicality. Some people talk about spatial computing because we are laying out, being able to visualize or lay out computing infrastructure, be it screens, be it touch screens, be it whatever you want it to be within our space. But it could also be that I have a pet dragon that follows me around all day, every day. And so what's happening with kind of a lot of these mixed reality glasses, so what Magic Leap has done, and obviously what Microsoft has done with the HoloLens 1 and 2, I think is really interesting. Brandy, can you talk us a bit about what the HoloLens is and does, and why people are so excited?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the HoloLens, HoloLens 1 really kind of started off as a dev kit for us to see, how people were really going to use it. We gave that to developers and commercial companies to see what kind of ROI they would get. And that really helped us, all that feedback helped us to build HoloLens 2. And HoloLens 2 has a lot of changes in the technology, but it's really the first untethered holographic computer that you wear that really can give you that mixed reality of kind of the virtual and the physical. For us today, HoloLens is very much it's an enterprise device. And what I mean by that is we are selling the device to enterprise companies, but those enterprise companies are also using it many times with consumers. So, we were just talking about 3D models, and you were talking about, I can't remember which clothing store you were talking about where Tommy. They would do. Okay. Yep. So Tommy, we see other retailers doing that today. If you look at like one of our partners, Hevelis, they've done a fantastic job with their augmented store and some of the things that they've done with Italian furniture designer Natuzzi. And, Natuzzi, store zero for them was right here in London at Tottenham Court Road. And that's a consumer experience using HoloLens 2 and also mobile devices to really help their customers, their consumer customers, visualize what their furniture, their custom Italian furniture can look like, and what it can look like, not only in a store, but what it can look like in their, in their home. So I think that's a really good example of, what this can be used for, and where you can blend that consumer and also enterprise world. We see it really, though, for frontline workers, right? So whether that's a salesperson in a furniture store, or whether that is, an NHS doctor doing rounds in a COVID ward in order to be able to limit the number of doctors that are actually exposed to the COVID virus with different patients, or looking at a manufacturing line where, people are able to use a HoloLens 2 device to go through guided work instruction, where they can really learn much more quickly by seeing and physically doing, the actual job at hand. And they can see an overlay of the 3D model on the actual device kind of sitting, or the asset sitting right in front of them, and see the instruction, how do they put this together, or how do they take this apart? Seeing
You've
those
got some phenomenal stats on that, haven't you? Isn't it? It's
yeah,
considerable multiple faster to learn with a mixed reality device. I wouldn't want to quote it, but
no. So, well, it's different, I would say, for every, kind of customer. So I think it does depend on the complexity of what they're trying to learn, but we have seen, 150% knowledge retention, 150% more knowledge retention for people that are going through that. So it's a great thing to have when you have an aging workforce, and you're really trying to train up new staff, and you're also trying to attract a younger workforce that wants to see what's coming in the new age, and they get to put on this really cool mixed reality headset and go through their training, or use that when they're on the job and dial in a remote expert that could be across the world, but they need help. And that person can't fly, especially, during these types of times. And they're able to dial them right into the headset, and that person on the other end of the call can see exactly what, that field technician is doing. So
yeah,
it's an incredible technology, and it's evolving and getting better and better. And we're taking a lot of feedback from developers and from customers on, use cases that we didn't even imagine. That they're, helping us to visualize, and we're helping them to then expand the innovation.
it's awesome. I mean, a lot of people at the moment are obviously focusing within the enterprise space, and I think that's the right thing to do at the moment because of the technologies in the immersive space, but also when we think about why the metaverse is going, because it gives us a good return on investment. We can see the impact of these technologies now. A $3,000 to $4,000 device is a hard thing to purchase for a consumer at home for entertainment. But whenever we do look at what our visions of what the metaverse is, most of the sci-fi ones end up in a place of entertainment, of fun, of excitement, of games. They don't often talk about what the future of work is. Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I do. I think from an entertainment perspective, it's definitely going to get there. But I think, for us, mixed reality is that third wave of computing. And if you look at how the waves before us started, if you look at like PCs and mainframe computers, they started as huge computers that were super expensive, and the only people that could afford them were, enterprise companies. And eventually that technology, we learned more and more, and that technology was able to evolve into something where now, how many PCs do we all have in our home? Different PCs, or a laptop, or an iPad, all of those things. That's really evolved into the consumer and made it affordable, but also we found the right number, like the right use cases that can really hit the masses. And I think you saw this thing with mobile phone as well. It started with just kind of the business side, and then it really evolved. And I think that's probably the same thing that'll happen with the third wave of computing. We're still learning. We're looking at where can we get, the best return, or who is really going to get that best return on investment. And for us today, it's been the frontline workers for a HoloLens 2, but consumer is something that's definitely in our future. And I think, Alex Kipman talked quite a bit about this during our Build conference a few weeks ago. And so people can kind of listen to his vision for the consumer future as well at his keynote, or even on the fireside chat that he did.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. I wasn't trying to fish for a roadmap or anything that we
I don't
couldn't,
know.
you know, speak about under NDA. I know everyone has their things we talk about in timely manners.
Yep.
Obviously.
If you think, no, sorry. I was just going to say, if you think about like what's available with Azure Spatial Anchors today, you know, I mean, you can develop today mixed reality applications using Azure Spatial Anchors and really develop for the consumer. If you think about what they did with Minecraft Earth, right? Or we see people that are looking at, you know, doing even like holographic, you know, scavenger hunts, or, you know, we're seeing museum experiences now that are coming through with both phone and also even with HoloLens. So I think it's there and it's coming, but, you know, we're enabling that as well within the mixed reality services platform.
Absolutely. I think there's an interesting place where it's to do with the modality. So sometimes I will replace my reality with 100% digital. Sometimes it'll be 100% digital, but the humans will be physical. Sometimes everything will be physical other than the digital character. And we'll have every version of that layering backwards and forwards to jump in and dive in and out of the metaverse, because it's always going to be with us persistently, depending on what layer we're bringing in. And a friend of mine, we were talking recently that it's almost one of the reasons why most people are, you know, quite excited about this. It's kind of being given a glimpse into understanding fully what the iPhone was going to be in 2007. We didn't really understand it was a new paradigm in computing. We didn't understand that apps were entire businesses. The idea of Airbnb being a button within an application to access, you know, a hotelier that doesn't own any hotels. So I think there's something kind of special that we're kind of having glimpses into why we're excited. And the creatives is a good place to kind of lean into in the last part of this conversation. Is obviously Createch, creative and technology. I've always believed that, you know, technology is a science and creativity is an art. And one of the problems is that to get both of them closer together, the technology needed to get more accessible, more transparent, and the creatives needed to get more technically savvy. And as we are coming now with Createch and the creative technologies that we have now, we have an opportunity to do some pretty special things. But maybe Oliver, where do you think the opportunities are for kind of creatives, or some of the, you know, a couple of takeaways within pushing towards the metaverse?
I think one of the big sea changes recently, in part due to the help from our friends at Microsoft and Nvidia, has been the massive increase in available compute for everyone. You know, I have a laptop, it's quite powerful, but I also have an internet connection. It's a 5G internet connection indoors. And it means that I have access to the cloud, and I have access to more compute power than has previously been even conceivable. When you apply technologies like Unreal Engine, high quality visuals for display on any device, or they could be the background for your theater show. Suddenly you're not having to pay artists for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then the same amount of time again as render time. It just improves the production value of everything, especially if you're looking at stuff like the immersive theater industry, through to things that the Royal Opera House are doing with their experimentations. It enables creative vision to be enacted for a much more reasonable budget. And at the end of the day, that trickles down into the practices of people in the small towns, the villages, the community halls. It's no longer the purview of the big institutions. And when you give people the ability to get access to technologies at a cheap and affordable price, suddenly you get things you never expected.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's about access, like you said, Brandy, about access to the device. There's things being created on it you didn't imagine that the developers would be. I remember from one of the first HoloLens 1 demos in Seattle, there was about, I think, 10 or 12 companies brought over. And the chap next to me had made a HoloLens version of the Lemmings. Remember the little characters? But they walked along the desk in front of me and I had to block them, and they dug and everything else. And that to me just blew my mind of what was possible. My house was now the playground. These virtual characters lived in my house and I had to move them around in the same mechanic and idea. And then the next person over was teaching people how to do knee surgery. And I was like, this is the big pair of sunglasses that I'm wearing, the headset isn't important. It's the creative use of it and the application of it. Jeff, as we're kind of pushing fully fledged towards kind of creating the metaverse, the pandemic seems to be a forcing function to kind of make us think about why is it important to us and where is it going. Is there a kind of something that's impactful to you, or something which you think is so important about what it will do for humanity to make the world a better place?
Absolutely. So there's a number of angles to this. One of them I'll touch on is the creative side of things. The idea of being able to say, how do I collaborate with friends who are fellow artists or technologists, and the idea of being able to have an environment to do so. The metaverse that we move toward. I'm amazed at some of the art production and interesting things that have come out of this pandemic, the lockdown that's existed. If one could have looked beforehand and said, it'll be challenging and people won't be able to really get together, but the new normal has been, from my perspective, surpassed, and the bar has been raised in terms of people being able to engage in virtual production. For our keynote, there was a marbles technology demo that we made. You can find it on YouTube, and that was produced entirely by artists who were all locked down in COVID, and none of the people who worked on it met each other in terms of face-to-face. Many of them hadn't worked together before, and so just seeing that, you're like, wow, that's actually pretty great. If we take a little step back and actually look at the idea of education available for everybody, I really think that the pandemic that we're currently in is really forcing us to take steps forward from a creation standpoint, and ensure that we have accessibility to people. It's funny, you talk with people at various companies, and they don't have enough VPN access, and they're throttling various streaming services and so on. But what it's proven is the resiliency of the internet, the importance of the open standards that it's built on, so that we have this incredible scalability. To Ollie's point, the monstrous amount of compute that's available in the cloud providers, has been really able to take that on. So I'm seeing what will come out of this is the idea of it's expected that you should be able to collaborate globally, and it's expected that you should be able to you could be anywhere you want, and you have the ability through the technology means that we have and the open source standards we have. And to Ollie's point again on the ubiquitous and large amounts of compute, I'm still staggered by the advancements of like the next generation of GPU that we've announced. It's just how do the engineers do it? It's amazing. And most importantly, what are the applications that will come out of that? Is it going to be amazing Minecraft in real-time ray tracing, or is it going to be? Yeah, well, yes, and it is. But the idea of being able to, in Brandy's example, wear a HoloLens and be able to have laparoscopic surgery, in your example, Saul, that's really important. I'd like for the surgeon who might operate on my knee after a horrendous skiing accident someday to have practiced a few times, and rather than practice and then bam, first into the OR. So again, I really see that there's some positive coming out of the interactivity and the creativity, and that's what I'm excited to see what everybody globally builds in this new normal that we have.
Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate your time. 45 minutes goes so swiftly when there's so many interesting things to talk about. And I think that's one of the places that we have ended up with Createch, is that all of the boundaries that we had defined for us, that this is for architecture and this is for medical and this is for theatre, we have a whole new playground to kind of work with, and a whole bunch of new tools that we can use for engineering or for fine art or for experimental dance. They can all be, those tools be used in the same way. So I think we're quite lucky to be living in this space, and it's the collaboration between all of us which will help us all move forward with these technologies. And just as I said at the beginning, it's the same for the forcing function for the pandemic, for us to understand that we are one species and we need to look after each other. So thank you so much for joining us, Brandy, Jeff, Oliver, appreciate it. Thank you for CogX for having us, and very much thank you to Janet at Createch for allowing us 45 minutes to talk about one of the futures that I really believe we will be in sometime soon. So thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Sol and team. That was just as illuminating as I was hoping it would be. What's there not to like about the metaverse? In layman's terms, it's where we cross the divide between a physical world, a digital world, across different sectors, across different communities. It's already here. It's ever evolving with VR games, with MR and AR. It broadens our experience, allows us to bring people together who are geographically separated. And it needs open standards, open platforms, multiple creative and consumer applications. Mixed reality is the third wave of computing. It's exciting, it's the opportunity to do special things, and it will make the world a better place. If you want to find out more about the metaverse and what Sol and his friends and allies are doing about it, please contact him direct at the Rewind Expo booth. You'll find it listed in the Expo directory and identified as a Createch Ones to Watch. It certainly is. We're taking a break from the main Createch stage now to give you the chance to explore the rest of the festival, or catch up on emails, or just take a break. Createch stage is back in business from 5 to 7, with 3 fascinating back-to-back sessions about the digital future of art, AI in entertainment, and living through fiction. I'm taking a break myself now for the rest of the day, so you'll have a new MC join you later. Now it's my chance to enjoy the festival too. I'll be back tomorrow bright and early. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thanks very much.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.